Heidi, it is such a great honor, and I'm so excited to have you on She Leads today. So thank you so much for joining.
It is great to be here.
Yeah.
Happy Friday.
Yes, happy Friday. So Heidi, you are a VC. You're a partner at Threshold Ventures, and you are on the board of many companies, including British media company DMGT, which is a public company, as well as private companies including Memphis Meats, Polar, Zooks, among many more. You also co-lead Stanford's Threshold Ventures Fellows Program in the MS&E department. And even before all of this, you co-founded a software company, Teammaker, which you were the CEO for 12 years. It got acquired. And even before venture capital, you also were the head of worldwide developer relations at Apple. So such a exciting career that I'm excited to dive into. But
I've been around for a long time.
No, it's amazing. So before we even get into where you are now, I want to take me all the way back to your childhood and just where you first saw glimpses of entrepreneurship in you and where you first saw yourself as someone who can build things.
Sure. Well, I was really lucky in that my father was an entrepreneur. He was always that kind of person who just had this really very focused idea that you could make money doing things that were interesting to you and you didn't have to work for anybody. And so by the time I was born, my brothers are much older than I am. And by the time I came along, my dad was pretty much working independently as a consultant in the video space. And he always said, why would you work for someone else when you can work for yourself? So I did, my parents got divorced and we went through some challenging financial times. And when I was about 12 years old, I decided I needed to make some money of my own. And I actually started doing puppet shows for children's birthday parties. And I literally started when I was 12 years old. And my mom used to drive me to the shows. And sometimes the moms would answer the door and they were like, "Are you one of the guests?" And, "No, I'm your peer." Wow. And so it was pretty funny. It was pretty rinky-dink to start. But by the time I was a senior in high school, I was doing about 6 shows every weekend. And I was pulling in almost $1,000 a month, which in 1975, $76 was like, actually my first full-time job when I got out of Stanford also paid $1,000 a month. So, for perspective. Yeah. So I actually built that little business into a fairly lucrative business. Obviously not something I was going to continue as a career, but it was, it taught me a lot about marketing, responsibility, showing up, time management, all of those things. It was a great little learning ground for a future.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love it. And so then you find yourself at Stanford and you got a BA in English, which definitely strays from the stereotypical technical background that you see in Silicon Valley, in tech, venture capital, and all of that. So walk me through, your thought process. Did you know what you wanted to be when you were in college? Did you kind of, how did you navigate almost your major and also your career?
Yeah, I mean, I knew what I wanted to be. I was just wrong. I thought I wanted to be a writer. I don't know. I thought I wanted to be a creative writer, and not a journalist, but a novelist or something. I mean, I don't know. I guess I didn't really think very hard about how I was supposed to make money doing that. But I put myself through school, and so I had a job. I had basically about a 20-hour-a-week job as the production manager at Stanford Daily, and I had that the whole time I was at Stanford. And so I learned a fair bit about production processes of how to get paper out, and then when I graduated, there weren't a whole lot of jobs for creative writing majors, and there were a lot of jobs for technical writers, and so interestingly, my first job out of Stanford was as the editor of the company newspaper for what at the time was a very, very hot startup called Tandem Computers. It was a Kleiner-backed super hot startup. It spun out of, the founder was from HP, and a very high-flying company, and I joined it before it went public. So, not unlike what people do today, right? You get a fuzzy studies major and you find yourself at a tech company. Yeah. But I joined Tandem, and I did both writing for, I was the editor of the company newspaper and the writer and the photographer and the production manager. I was kind of one-woman shop. And then I also taught some of the entry-level courses in becoming facile with our word processor and our email system and things like that. And so what I realized when I got there is everybody who had the interesting jobs, they were either the engineers or the MBAs. And it was too late for me to be an engineer, I thought, especially since my undergrad was, I did take CS 106, but that was it.
Yeah.
So I decided that I would go back to business school. So I went back to Stanford Business School. And that's when really the personal computer revolution was really taking off. I was there 81 to 83. And I'm fortunate to have a brilliant programmer brother who unfortunately went to Cal, but that's okay. We'll let that go.
Yeah.
And he had started the company, actually. He had started writing this software product, but he didn't really want to run the company. He wanted to do the create the product. And so he and I joined together and I became the CEO, and that went on for 14 years.
Incredible.
From start to end.
So at this point, did you ever have people kind of guiding your career or telling you should go into this, or was it almost just you found tandem computers, you were doing in writing, and then you just how was the navigation process?
Well, I think you fall. I mean, first of all, I think this is like a Stanford disease where all Stanford students think that you highly orchestrate your career and it's very defined, and I think up until the time you come to Stanford and even through Stanford, there is a path and you can get on it or not. There are many paths. And I would say real life is very random. It doesn't follow those paths. And so for me, I wasn't really interested in computers, but as an English major and as a writer, it's hard for this generation to remember. But when I was a freshman at Stanford, we were using typewriters and whiteout, right?
Yeah.
When I took CS 106, it was on punch cards. So when you go from that to, for example, word processor, and you discover this incredible freedom to write whatever you want and come back later and massage it and move things around, that's like a religious experience for a writer. And so for me, the magic of a personal computer was not how to build one, but what an average user like myself could do with it.
Yeah.
So I really did get passion around the computing industry, but very much from a user-centric perspective, which now, of course, running a software company for 14 years, you learn a thing or two about software development, right? I mean, you do end up actually probably getting pretty smart about that stuff. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I still kind of have the heart of the average user, and that's how I look at things. And so, no, I mean, I didn't have I went back to business school because I thought everybody getting ahead had an MBA. Then I graduated, and as I jokingly say, I went to work for my brother who said he wanted to work with me in spite of my MBA. Then I was there for 14 years, basically, being the CEO of that company, sold that company.
Yeah.
By then I was pretty, well versed in the software development industry, and ultimately got hired by Apple to run developer relations, which was a kind of a natural progression.
Yeah.
But, went to a large corporation and I was like, okay, this is not for me. So I was there for a year. And during that time, as soon as I left, I got recruited onto some boards. There was one company, Great Plains Software. It was about to go public. It was acquired by Microsoft, but it at first went public. And the CEO there, Doug Burgum, who had gotten to know me as both a customer of their software and as the person running developer relations at Apple. And as soon as I left Apple, he called me literally the next day and he said, I'd really like to strengthen my board before my IPO and I'd like you to join my board. So that's when I got into doing corporate governance. I joined his board. I joined some other boards. And that was, that was a good training ground for venture capital, because a lot of what you do in venture capital, once you make the decision to invest, looks a lot like what you do when you're on a board.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of, I cannot say it wasn't like I planned on any of these things. Now I will say that I did have some thought processes, right? I used to sit down every year and say kind of, what's my 1-year plan? What's my 5-year plan? What's my 10-year plan? Where do I see myself going? And interestingly, even back when I was the CEO of the company, long before we even considered selling it, I wrote a 10-year plan where I was like, I'd like to ultimately work in a corporation, a place like Apple, and then maybe ultimately become a venture capitalist. So it turns out it went that way.
Wow.
And I do think that there were things I did knowing, for example, that I wanted to become a venture capitalist and get into corporate governance, I joined the trade association boards. I was more open to the idea, and I was pursuing those sorts of opportunities to build muscle strength in areas like corporate governance and to build my network in for example, trade associations. You get to know a lot more people than you do just being the CEO of your company.
Definitely.
And so I did take, I would say, measured action to qualified for the opportunity, right? There was some planning there, but it was not as precise as I think people like to think it is.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, there's so many directions I could take this, but I am interested. So take me to when you were founding Teammaker with your brother, and so I've watched ETL talks with you, and you mentioned how someone advised you to, like, you should be the CEO, and this was crazy because you were the first female CEO of a software company in Silicon Valley.
Well, there were Sandy Kurtzig, I think, predated me, but I was one of the first.
One of the first. So tell me that thought process. Did you have doubts in yourself that you could be the CEO? And even more, like when you were hiring a great team, were people doubting you coming from Stanford? Like, yes, from Stanford, but with a non-technical background. Like, were there any
I think it was more about being non-technical than it was about being a woman. And I think that the interesting thing, in a funny way, is the industry was so nascent that there wasn't really a pattern yet. Yes, there were no women running companies, but there also weren't that many companies. And so it wasn't like people looked around and said, well, there's 1,000 other companies, they're being run by men, and so you can't do it. And really because the market was so new and so different. And of course, we started small. We bootstrapped the company for actually 6 years before we ever raised venture. So the only people we had to convince that we were a legitimate company was the customer. Okay. And the customers didn't know whether I was a woman or a creative writing major or a German Shepherd. I mean, all they knew is, did the software work or not? Did it do what it was supposed to do? And so, I think that one of the luxuries that is also a responsibility, but when you're the CEO, you get to design the company and design the kind of people you want to have with you. Mm-hmm. And I think by definition, if there were people who were sexist or who didn't think that I could do the job because I wasn't technical, well, they probably didn't come work for us. They probably didn't apply for jobs. So I think when we got to be about, at our height, I think we were about 100 people, and I think we were about 60% women. I mean, we were right around gender parity, which was highly unusual at the time. Yeah. But, you tend to hire like yourself, which can be both a good and a bad thing. And so to me, it made total sense to hire other women. Why not?
Yeah. So talking about hiring, staying on this track and just building a team. I know, as you said, it's easy to fall under this trap almost where you're hiring like yourself, and even more so, people almost feel like they need to be the best in the room and they want to be able to teach who they hire. So tell me, like, it actually should be the opposite, and you should hire people who are smarter than you. So talk about
I have a lot of thoughts on this, but the first thing, you tend to hire people from your network who resemble you, right? I mean, that's what people do unless they really understand why there is strength in diversity. Yeah. So I would say the first 20 employees I hired, they all came out of Stanford, right? I think they were all single. Nobody had families. Nobody had children. Nobody had any other responsibilities. Yeah. They were all super smart, and I learned something really interesting about, hiring really inexperienced people who are really smart and a whole bunch of them who are just like you. In fact, I joked about it. We had our first kind of cycle of performance reviews. Well, not our first, but we were maybe 25, 30 people. Yeah. And, I asked them all what their career aspirations were, and every single one of them wanted my job. Every single one wanted to be the CEO of the company. Yeah. I was like, damn, maybe I better hire some people who actually want to do the jobs they want to do, right? And so first of all, like, I remember the first time we hired a receptionist who was not from Stanford, who didn't immediately want my job, who was actually highly skilled and trained in her job. And when I asked her what her career aspiration was for next year, she said she wanted to get to 80 words a minute as a typist. I was like, oh, thank God, someone who actually wants to get better at the thing that is actually relevant to the job they had, because she did a bunch of data entry and other stuff for us. And so, at the other end of the scale, we finally started, I think we got big enough and our name got well enough known, and then we could attract people who had more experience than I did. And I learned a lot by recognizing that if you could hire people who actually were better at things than you were, that your company would benefit from that. And learning how do you attract and motivate and retain people who are actually smarter than you, certainly smarter at the things you need them to do, is, again, it's another skill set you have to learn and you have to build.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think even having this conversation and just talking about it also increases the diversity and making sure that you're not always hiring people who are like you. And I think that's incredibly important. So I think that's true.
Well, and it also just, there are so many, I'm such a huge proponent of it now. There are so many reasons why, as they say in nature, diversity in the gene pool leads to stronger organisms. I mean, you have to have in your employee base a reflection of your customer and the geographies you intend to be in and the demographics you intend to be in. And I really believe that people with different perspectives and different life views and different skill sets bring more more powerful diversity of thought to the decisions you have to make in a company that moves your product and your team and your philosophy and your channels and everything else forward. And you'll do a better job with diversity, but it's unfamiliar. People tend to gravitate towards something familiar to them. And sometimes diversity, comes in packaging that people aren't as accustomed to, and therefore they're not as open to it. And so you have to really make a conscious effort to do it.
Definitely. And I think a big part is also just like having that empathy. You can gain empathy for your customers, for your employees, which brings me to ask, so as an entrepreneur, do you see those lessons you learned and being on that side of the table? Do you see that kind of make you more successful as a VC and being more empathetic to the entrepreneurs that come and pitch to you all the time?
Oh, I think for sure. Absolutely. I mean, I spent, 15 years of my life being in the CEO seat, and people think that's super fun. It's also really hard, and it's people think it's a lot of freedom, but actually it's not. I used to say to the people who work for me, well, you can quit. I can't. I can't just walk out the door if I'm unhappy about things here. I have to stay and fix it. And so, yes, I do think it. For example, obviously in the era we're in with COVID-19, a lot of companies are having to tighten their belts and do layoffs. And it's really easy to sit in your office on your Zoom and say, well, I think you should riff 10% of the people. It's really hard to actually do that and be the person. And it's really hard for those people who lose their jobs. And so I think having empathy for not only the CEO who has to go do it, and the leadership team who has to execute on that, but the employees who are affected. I just think it's important. It's important to lead with your humanity, and that doesn't mean that you are immune from making hard decisions. I think that you can have empathy and still have conviction in making hard decisions.
Yeah.
But I do think it's helpful. I mean, I think also just every once in a while, I was on a call 2 nights ago and we were discussing something really important and about a direction for the company. And I stopped everyone and I asked the CEO and the founder, are you guys excited about doing this? Because if you're not excited, the board shouldn't ask you to do it. And they were like, yeah, no, we're really excited about this. I'm like, okay, great. And that's that's the direction I'm going to vote for. At the end of the day, the entrepreneur and the CEO, the people who are in the company are going to drive what happens, not the VCs and the board members sitting on the outside. And that's just important to remember. And I probably remember it more because I was one myself.
Yeah, definitely. And I know, so Heidi, there's a Harvard Business School case study about you and how you lead your career, and more so the importance of building these relationships and meaningful relationships that you could call back on someone and have a coffee with them and just in general. So I want to hear almost your advice for people to, I don't want to say network and build your network, but essentially build these relationships with people. What advice can you give?
Well, I do kind of hate the word networking. It kind of reminds me of some yucky thing you do at at business cocktail parties, or or somebody monkey barring from connection to connection with with a transaction in mind. And I think the way I describe it is, I like to think about my life as being relationship driven, not transaction driven. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, the difference is, when you reach out to someone and it's because you're interested in a transaction, then you're only as good as that transaction, and you're very focused on transaction. You go way after the transaction. If you think about fellow travelers in life, as I like to call them, in different fields and different companies, different age demographics, different skill sets, but just people you feel, for whatever reason, hey, I want that person in my orbit, and I want to be in their orbit. And maybe there is no immediate transaction. Maybe it's just, hey, I want to have a relationship with this person because I value their opinion, or I think what they're doing is interesting, or I use their product, and ultimately you build these relationships, and then the transactions are secondary. And part of what I say in the case is that it's amazing how many times people come back around again, right? That you see the same people over and over again, because the truth is we think it's a big world, but in our niches it's a fairly small world. And if people remember you for always putting the relationship first, it doesn't mean all the time that it doesn't mean you get the best deal all the time, or it doesn't even mean you can get a deal done all the time. Sometimes you can't, right? But if you're always thinking, I'm gonna meet you again, and you're going to judge me by my character and by what I did in this time, and how I behaved, and did I do, was I upfront and honest and ethical and responsive, and did I, it doesn't mean I can't also get a good deal, but then you're going to be more inclined to work with me the next time around. And so that to me, and plus, actually, if you read a bunch of books about happiness, as I did when I was going through my divorce, one of them, I boiled it down to, happiness is about meaningful life and meaningful work and meaningful relationships. And, I think one of the things about tech entrepreneurship is very often you build those meaningful relationships through meaningful work with the people, and like I just had a couple people over last weekend who I used to work with at Teammaker. We sold Teammaker in 1994, right? 1994. Let's see. Most of your viewers or people listening will not have even been born then, and I'm still hanging out with those people, right? They're still my friends, because we went through this incredible thing together, and you really bond over those shared work experiences. And so, I'm just a big believer in that, and I think that one of the things I talk about, I think in the I don't know, one of the speeches I've given in the past that's on, I think it's on the ETL site, but from about 5-6 years ago, is that looking for the maximal intersection of mutual need whenever you sit down and try to negotiate with someone, trying to figure out how you make the pie bigger so you can both win, how you come up with the best solutions, and how you try to solve their problem for them. It isn't all about you and your problem. It's how can I help you solve your problem too? Definitely. Will make for stronger deals and stronger relationships. So I'm just a big believer in that.
Yeah, and also you mentioned in your talk how it's not only to people who you want value from. It should be anyone. When you go to Starbucks and you're talking to the barista, it should be anyone that you're talking to. It shouldn't just be this transaction.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why people should be different.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Depending on the status or the importance of who they're dealing with. Like, I just don't get that. Yeah. And I don't think it's a good way to live. I mean, I think it's just part of being a good human is as Bill and Melinda Gates say, all lives have equal value. I like to think that way as well.
Yeah. So obviously in your career, you've often been the only female in the room, and you're almost used to that, where you're the only female, you're in a male-dominated space. And I talked to Tina about this, and it can often be viewed as a self-fulfilling prophecy where you think, okay, I'm the only female, and you kind of bring it onto yourself, which I resonate with that as well. Like, you shouldn't have that perception of yourself, because then that's kind of what gets projected.
Yeah.
So, I want to hear your perspective of being the only female in the room and your experience, and kind of how upcoming female entrepreneurs, like the outlook that they should have, and almost just in general, your experience and advice.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think things have changed a lot, and I'm very glad for that. And like I say, yes, 40 years ago, and sometimes 30 years ago, and even as recently as 10 years ago, there are cases where I'm the only woman in the room.
Yeah.
Less and less frequent. And it's how I live my life. So to me, it's like I don't even notice it anymore. In fact, I was on a call yesterday with, again, one of the boards I'm on. It was a subcommittee. And there was only one man and there were 7 women. Because it was the senior leadership team. It was the head of HR, the CFO, and the general counsel, the CEO, one other board member, and me. Okay. And all of us are women except the CEO. And so I almost said something as a joke, and then I thought, nope, not going to call it out. I'm just going to enjoy this moment and not make anyone feel like this is odd, because this shouldn't be odd, right? Because if I were the only woman, I wouldn't say, hey, I'm the only woman.
Exactly.
So, I do think things are changing. First of all, it's not like you can hide the fact that you're a woman. It's not like you can go pretend to be different. I mean, we are who we are. And I think trying to constantly pretend you're something else is actually hard to do. It's like speaking a foreign language you don't speak that well. So I think that, the advice I give is, I really say be yourself. And if you find yourself in an environment where it's a disadvantage to be a woman, you need to find another environment.
Yeah.
Because that is not the case in most places. In most places, I do believe that the companies that I work with, I guess by the very definition, if they're going to take our money and have me on their board, they're probably not afraid of having a strong woman in the room. And so I do think there are places where bro cultures and subtle or even non-subtle harassment situations exist. And I think you either got to try to change it or you got to get out of there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's great advice. So before we finish with the last 2 questions, I do want to just ask you to explain your 20-40-60 rule, because I love that, and I think it's important that people know to be advocates. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question to close on, and I do have to close on because I actually have a board call in 3 minutes.
Yeah,
so,
that's totally fine.
20-40-60 rule, which actually Shirley MacLaine said it first, not me, but I've said it so often I think I come up ahead of her on Google results. And here's how it goes. At 20, you're constantly worried about what other people think of you. At 40, you think, I'm no longer going to give a damn what other people think of me. And at 60, you come to realize nobody thinks of you. And so what I love about that is it really is true. Most people are just really in their heads about themselves. Other people are not waking up every day. Even your mom's probably not thinking about you all the time. And so I think it is both. It means the responsibility is on you, right? Nobody's waking up every day going, I wonder if Heidi's getting paid enough. I wonder if she likes her job. I wonder, people do not do that. You've got to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
But the flip side is you also shouldn't take yourself so seriously. Like, okay, you said something dumb at the meeting yesterday. So what? Like nobody really spends that much time thinking about you, and most of the time you agonize over yourself way more than you need to. So I say, you learn. If you make a mistake, you learn from it. If you need to apologize to someone, you apologize and try to figure out how not to make that mistake again. But then move on. I think I see a lot of people do what I call endless spin cycle, where they keep going over the mistake they made in their head and going over it and going over. It's like, forget that. Yeah. There is no value to that. Learn from the mistake and then learn to put it away. And the more you can train your brain to do that, I think the better off you're going to be as well.
Yeah, I think it's so true. I think it's a great piece of advice. Okay, final question.
Well, yes, okay, make it fast.
Okay.
Because I get on this call.
It'll be last. Okay, what is a fun or weird talent that you have that no one else really knows about?
Well, besides puppeteering, which I already spilled the beans, some people know about this, but in my spare time, I make kiln formed glass. Ooh. And I really, really enjoy. Oh, in fact, here I have a piece right here.
Amazing!
I didn't know you were going to ask me that. But, okay, so I make stuff that looks like this.
Oh, that's so cool! Oh my goodness!
And this, my fake background is making this hard to hear.
No, I could see it. I think that looks amazing. Wow,
that's one of my pieces.
I love it.
And I really enjoy doing that. And I was thinking I might try to fire up the kiln and make some glass this weekend. So
I love it. Well, Heidi, I've absolutely loved it. Thank you so much for coming on this show. It's been great.
That was a lot of fun. All right. Good to talk to you.
Bye.
Bye.